Welcome, everyone. I'm Princess Sa. Thank you so much for coming out tonight. We are going to be talking with John about the TurboGrafx-16 Hotline and just all things Turbo. So just to give you a little bit background on John, we are so lucky that John joined us today. John is a 30-year game industry veteran who has worked on everything from the TG16, our fave, to the VR. A few of his career highlights include being a producer on Mortal Kombat, Arctic Thunder, Marvel Avengers Initiative, and many more. And of course, working with NEC on the TG16 era. So,
hmm
with
Thank
that,
you.
thank you for coming out, John. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
So I'm not gonna dilly dally. We're just gonna go ahead and we're gonna dive right in. And of
Okay.
course, the first question is, how did you get started working for the TurboGrafx-16 Hotline? And even I guess, what was it? So give people background on what the hotline was itself.
Yeah, back in that time, there was no internet, right? At least the way it is now. So there was only BBSs, and that was very niche. So when you play games and you got stuck, um, you had a couple options like talk to your friends, look at the magazines that would always have like breakdowns for levels and how to play games, or call a phone number. And that was the world of Stranger Things and that kind of stuff back in the 80s. And people would um, call the phone number, right? Because like in every game in the manuals, you would see an 847 number, and that was a toll number based in a suburb of Chicago called Wooddale, Illinois, and people would call up, and there was a whole crew of uh, 50, 60, 70 split across shifts of folks, and we would answer phone calls and try and talk people through. You're stuck on, Keith Courage and Alpha Zone level 4. How do you fight the M boss? That kind of stuff. So, it all started just being a year out of college, having a portfolio geared towards graphic design, and wanted to retool it for the advertising world. And I needed some kind of monies. I was married at the time; my wife was working, but I saw an ad in a newspaper, like literally a classified ads, and I've got a picture up on Twitter and stuff like that. It's crazy to look at it. It was like work 20 hours a week for 550 an hour. And open house. So I showed up there, and somebody interviewed me that clearly had no idea about video games, but it had a script of like, what do you call the character you fight at the end? I'm like, boss, yes, yes, you win, So um, I got the job and, started on the hotline phone. And yeah, that was 1989. I think it was like August, something like that in the summer. And, the rest is history.
So did you actually see it in the newspaper? Like you were reading through the newspaper and
Yes.
you saw it, or like someone didn't like call you up and say like, "Hey, you should go do this."
No, it was a story like looking at the Daily Herald, which was the suburban newspaper in Chicago, and I was just like, I need a job. I'm working on my portfolio. Oh wow, video games. Well, I'd grown up, and I always say this in Stranger Things time. Like I went to the arcade in the '80s. That was my life. Playing Spy Hunter and Robotron, and I later got to work with those guys at Midway, George Gomez and Eugene Jarvis and those kind of people. But that was my life, was like playing video games and television, just to really date myself, right? Because that was, you know, all that was the cutting edge back when the Atari 2600 was out. So, and all through college, I was always at the arcade. So that that was my passion. And I was like, well, I can play video games and make $92 a week while I'm getting my portfolio recalibrated. And I'll just do this for a little bit of time, and I'll go work for an ad agency and do that. And one thing led to another, and I got offered a full time gig, and it all kind of
30 years later, you're you're still in the game industry.
32. Yeah, it was like 89, and yeah, it was yeah. What a long, strange trip it's been, right? So
it's
yeah.
it's funny how life can take turns, unexpected, pleasant turns like that. How exactly did it work? So obviously people called in, but like,
Mhm.
did you have a binder full of answers? Like, what
Yes.
if I called you up and asked you how to beat Bonk's Adventure, what would happen?
Yeah, what happened is like when we first started, there were just like these big tables, these big folding tables. It was a little low rent, but it was just ramping up, and everybody had a phone and this kind of like neon green binder that had tips in there. So when you weren't on the phone trying to talk someone through an emboss, you were actually just playing the game. Everyone had small monitors, excuse me, and we were playing the games to kind of understand how to beat them so that we could talk through giving tips. And inevitably, people would call and you'd be like, "Oh, I haven't played that game yet," or and there was this guy Mike, and everybody would be like, you put the hand over the phone, and be like, "Mike, how the hell do you get by that emboss?" So like Mike was like this savant. Like Mike would just pick up a game and just finish it. Like just and I'm like, "How the did you get through that game?" Like he was a monster. So like anytime people got stuck, we would just yell at Mike because it was on different shifts. So I was 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. and it was broken in different shifts going to 11 p.m. But luckily this Mike was on my shift, and if I didn't know how to get by, people would ask Mike, and then as the game library grew, we would add more games to this binder and just keep growing it and be making photocopies at NEC corporate and doing all that kind of stuff.
So
And it was an 807 number. Yeah.
were you making it as you went? So basically, like when you started, there was like nothing, and then like
Yeah,
slowly.
there was like that, and we were like, because I think we launched with like 6 or 10 games or something like that. Maybe it was, I don't know, that was a long time ago, but yeah, and we just kept growing it. And I just remember my buddy Mark and I would be like standing there at the copier, like just trying to figure out how to print all these extra copies and put them in the binder to go back to the phone calls and be able to answer those questions. And yeah, it was a binder. Like there was no computer, there was no terminal, um, anything like that. So
And
that's how you did it.
and then what was like the environment work like? Did you have like a huge call volume? Did you have a bunch of coworkers? It sounds like you had quite a few coworkers and there were shifts, but like what was it
Yeah,
like working at a hotline back then for a game for game tips?
weird. Like when I think about it, I was like, wow, that was, it was like kind of corporate in the sense we were at NEC, um, U.S. corporate headquarters. So it was like a building. It was a two-story building, it was pretty large, and all the other divisions of NEC were there. So at its time in the peak, like NEC was kind of like a second tier Sony, right? So it was almost like a Samsung. So they had VCRs and TVs, and they had very high end monitors. The multi sync monitors were out there. So we were like in this one section of this giant building, and it seemed very normal. You drive up, it was kind of corporate America, but then you came in, and there was just like this huge room full of tables and phones and binders, and you were answering these questions. So that was kind of weird. And I was looking at the shifts. I found an old sheet. Like there was 8 to 12, 12 to 4 p.m., and then 3 to 7. There were two shifts, and that might have been like kids coming off of school or something like that. And then 7 to 11 was another shift. Now, luckily, the 8 a.m. to 12 p.m. shift wasn't really busy, right? Like there's
Yes.
not a lot of people, like 8 a.m. I'm going to go play a game, right? So it was kind of quiet, and those later shifts I think got busier. An average shift would be 12 to like 20 people. Um, it skewed young, kind of like the demographics, right? So as you would think, a lot of the people, like I was one of the old guys, back then in my, I don't know, 23 back then. A lot of them were college students going to Columbia or College DePage. So it was like a part-time job, right? And but then we had different people at different ages. There was a mom, there's a couple moms that were really good gamers, and they were part of the crew, which was cool. Um, and yeah, you would just sit there and play the games when you weren't on the phone. And then later it got a little bit more uh, with like cubicles or like walls, and then people had headsets and things like that. But yeah, it was just sitting there waiting the phones to ring. It would just kind of go sequentially, and you're up. It's yeah.
Did your other friends, were they like, how did you get a job with video games? Like, did everyone want the job?
Yeah, everyone was just like, "What?" And it was like, "Ah." They're like, "Hey, look at my check." You're like, "Whatever." No, I'm kidding. Um, yeah, it was very odd, but having a background in art and computer graphics and stuff like that, I was just like, "All right, I'll give this a shot for a little bit, and then I'll be moving on." And didn't work out that way, which is good. So
And then,
that's good. And we also worked a lot of trade shows, right? Like there were, everybody knows about E3, and I think E3 was like 96, I think, when that launched. But prior to E3, there was CES, and that was the big deal. And there was like a section of CES, Consumer Electronics Show, twice a year. It was Vegas in January, Chicago in the summer, that the game companies would come. So we would go there and, present. We had kiosks, we had games, we would talk to buyers and all that kind of stuff. And you're on your feet, all day. And that was kind of the big thing to do. I remember going to Vegas. That was the first time I went to Vegas, like 90, 91, yeah, 90, maybe, something like that.
well, that's
And
gotta
we
be
were we
pretty
were there.
cool as a like fresh college grad getting to travel for work.
Yeah, yeah, it was fun. Yeah, we went to Vegas and hung out at the Hard Rock, which was very small back then. Hard Rock was nothing like that. Um, and then there were like NEC, like, is huge, and NEC loved golf, right? So there was this tournament. NEC used to sponsor the Firestone Country Club International, like, televised tournament. So all of a sudden it was like, hey, we have to ship some kiosks and go to Akron, Ohio, to show the golf game for golfers walking. And I was just like, what? Okay, I'll go. So like me and this guy Brian, like we flew out or drove out, but we were out in Akron, Ohio, in this very exclusive country club in the sun, with a couple kiosks, and just we had the TurboGrafx going for golfers to check out our golf game. But I think it was just somebody at NEC thought it would be a cool perk to have it there. I don't know how many customers or buyers we got out of it, but it's a trip to Akron and hanging
Oh,
out Cleveland Flats and stuff. So yeah.
that's so funny. One of the TG16 members runs Power Golf as a speed run, so that's making us laugh.
That's cool.
What about you? What type of questions did people call in with to the hotline?
Yeah, a decent amount were Keith Courage and Alpha Zone, right? Because that was the bundle game, and how do I get by this boss and stuff. Some of them were on the RPGs, right? Because those were very big. It was a funny story. There was this person playing E's book 1 and 2, and was just calling all the time, and everyone was giving this person tips, and it felt like it went on for like weeks or months, and then they got to the end, and it was like they called up just to let us know they got to the end, and they broke down in basically in tears. It's like, I did it. I beat the game, and everyone's just like, wow, it was like crazy. It was like wild that like everyone we just helped this person get all the way through, and they were like so grateful that they called us to let us know and be like breaking down that they beat the game, because it was a tough game at the time, and you had to put a lot of hours into it. So R-Type, Splatterhouse, Keith Courage, those are some of the ones I'm thinking of. But yeah.
I still can't beat R type, so maybe I should have called into the hotline.
Well, it's Sprite tearing, all the controversy around that. So
It's nice that you got closure on that story though, because I think if someone called me like every day asking me for tips, I would want to know if they beat the game.
right, right. Did they do it? Did they do it?
Like,
Yeah, we had some weird calls too. There were some. I've got some notes here about some ideas about some of the weird calls. But yeah, there was.
did,
Most of the time they're garden variety. Like, how do I do this thing? But while we're talking about calls, I'll bring it up. There was this crazy story. I didn't take the phone call, but this person Charles said, somebody called up and the woman was like, "You owe us a bird." And it was like, "Bosses los? Like what? Like what do you mean?" And I guess the TV sports football game had a preview in one of the magazines, because Cinemaware, which was a very kind of cool developer at the time, developed on the Amiga, and they developed TV sports football. And then they had shown screenshots of the football game, and it showed like a cheerleader halftime show, which was like static images,
Hmm.
whatever. And then for some reason, for memory, who knows what reasons, it was cut out of the port when it came to the TurboGrafx.
Oh.
And then she's like, "You owe me a bird," and he was like, "Why?" And it's like, "My husband saw that magazine and the football and the halftime show, and he got so mad he killed the family bird."
No.
And he was just like, "Okay." And it's like, whoa, this is like crazy talk, right? And Charles like, I'm sorry, but it was like she felt like because it was false advertising and the halftime show wasn't in there, like husband flew a fan, killed a bird, and like NEC older bird. It's like,
Chat is like,
what?
chat is mystified. They're like, what? Oh, this is crazy.
Yeah, yeah, and you'd be like, the bird. We're like, what? And the lady got the phone call. And it's just like, that was a weird fucking call. It was like, what? And what? Killed a bird? We're like, and any CEOs are a bird? We're like, oh man, what kind of people? What the hell is that about? So it's every once in a while you get those kind of calls, and it wasn't just your typical how do I fight this M boss?
Yeah, did you have
But yeah,
training on how to handle that?
that
Like,
was some of the stuff you would hear. So
it's not
yeah,
like they prepare you for having that kind of
no,
call.
right. And then I remember we would get letters because Splatterhouse seemed like we were killing baby or fetuses or something,
Mm.
and we were like, no, it's just monsters, But there were people. There was like a writing campaign about killing fetuses in Splatterhouse. It was like, no, it's a gore game, and there was no intent to kill any fetuses. That was never the
That's
plan. It was,
yeah. Yeah, that's crazy. We
yeah.
we play Splatterhouse all the time. We love Splatterhouse. We call it Murder Bonk because my channel is all
Uh,
because
I gotta go back and play that. It's been like, okay,
that's oh,
cool.
those are some interesting stories. So eventually, you were promoted into this game development specialist role, and you were acting liaison between kind of the public and internal NEC teams. So let's
Mhm.
talk a little bit about what the market was like at that time, and like that role too, because I'm sure that was a unique role because I think it was created specifically for you or something like that. So tell us more about that.
Yeah, it was a role. I stepped into it after a person that was in that role got promoted into the marketing side. A gentleman by the name of Brad, who's still a friend of mine, a great guy. Um, it was kind of to be like a kind of a liaison between the hotline phone and marketing and
Oh.
development on the other floor in a different part of the building, right? Because it was to be that, hey, this is what we're hearing. This is kind of the front lines. Um, People are looking for this or whatever, and just kind of be that conduit. For lack of a better analogy, it was a full time job, so
Oh,
I was
nice.
like, well, I'll just put that portfolio on hold for a little bit. I have a full time job here, and it was early '90s, so it was especially a big Japanese corporation, so I wore a tie 4 days a week, which just bizarre, and there was like you go upstairs and there was a room where there were just a smoking room and people would just be like puffing away in this room in the office. It was like the smoking room, and it was just like, what? And yeah, this role was to give feedback on games, to kind of just be that conduit. And at the time, it's fuzzy, but it it felt like the Genesis had, kind of pulled away. And then was it, I don't know, 91 when the Super Nintendo came out. And then, Nintendo just has legions of fans, and it was doing the crazy stuff with the F-Zero and the um, kind of pseudo 3D. So, yeah, it was probably kind of uh, writing on the wall. But, I think back and there was so many great hardware advantages, between the Turbo Express and you're like, hey, I can take the game out and put it in my console, and just that interoperability of one game across different systems. Of course,
Yeah.
Turbo Express is too damn expensive at that price point, but it was a very slick piece of hardware. The Turbo Tap, the CD-ROM, we did all of that stuff. It was just, and to quote Al Nielsen, a friend of mine that was at, I worked at Viacom, and I later learned he was at Sega at the time, competing with us. The name of the game is the game, and you got to have that game. Bonk was the closest we got to Mario, but
Yeah.
we never bundled Bonk, which is was a lost opportunity. Like Sega bundled Sonic. So
You don't know how many times people come into my chat and are like, "Why wasn't Bonk the pack-in?" Like so many times.
yeah, yeah, and and I think people are like, well, we're not going to cannibalize that. I'm like, yeah, but you got to sell the razors to sell the razor blades, right? Like you got to get the systems out there. And, I couldn't fight that battle by myself. And there was a lot of smart people there and maybe some people that maybe not so much. But yeah, it was kind of on the way down, and I got involved work on the manuals. Like, and again, it sounds crazy, but like we had a specially rigged TurboGrafx with like a switch to flip it to pause the screen and freeze frame it. And then we go to a photo studio in Chicago and they would like take a photograph of the screen to do a screen grab. So there was this photographer, Guy Herka, I used to work with, that would like do that to get those like cool. And I would always be like, bring Chris, bring Mike. Like I need somebody that could get really far in the games because truth be known, like I'm not the world's greatest gamer, right? Like I'm good enough to get by. Like my skills are in other areas, and I would bring those people with me, and we would get these screenshots and work in the manuals. Like I worked on countless manuals. I don't remember all of them at this point. Just like writing tips or updating or fixing things and stuff. So
Well,
you know,
that's pretty funny because that takes us like full circle a bit. So it's really funny actually that you mentioned the manuals because how this all started, and I mean, I probably read the manuals as a kid. Like this is really just such a treat for me because I grew up playing the TurboGrafx-16. Like I grew up playing Bonks, and I had Boxy Boy and Splatterhouse and R-Type and all these games, and
cool.
I didn't ever really remember reading the manuals. And the other day we decided to read one, and we were flipping through the Splatterhouse manual, and we got to the end, and it had this hotline number, and we went, what? There was a hotline, and we got really pumped. And yeah, a member of the community Mondello network helped us find you and get to have this conversation. So it's funny that you also worked on the manuals themselves. It's like a full circle moment.
Yeah, connected full circle for sure.
um, so what about just there's been quite a few game documentaries that have come out in the last few years, and Red, my husband, and I have been enjoying those as we're staying inside more and looking, just kind of
Yeah.
going through a few different ones. But oftentimes the documentaries don't talk about the TG16. I think one of them had like a flash of actually Bonk at CES, kind of the same Bonk that you have a picture with. But other than that, other than that, I don't think we like there is never mentioned. I feel like.
Yeah. What is it? Kane West is the only one that talks about TurboGrafx, right? That kind of feels like the way it is right now. It we never hit that critical mass, and there was never that kind of David and Goliath, like the scrappy startup versus Nintendo. And it's sad, but when people want to have a story, that's what happens. And I got a Twitter discussion with Blake J. Harris, who wrote Console Wars, which is a great book. I totally recommend that for anybody. And I think it's not like a mini series or a documentary or something on CBS.
It's a documentary. Yeah, we watched that one.
You did? Okay, yeah. I need to watch that because I was like, "Hey, man, what about the TurboGrafx?" He was like, "Wait a minute, you know about it?" I was like, "I was there the whole time. I know everything." So he reached out to me. We had like an hour phone call, just talking about the TurboGrafx, and I was just, like, if you want to do an addendum to the book or any kind of more info and stuff like that, let me know. Um, so yeah, I think because it was kind of a two horse race at that point, and that's such a great story of the scrappy startup versus the established Nintendo. There's not room in that story for this. Hey, what about us over here? We had the Tap, and we had the Express, and we had Bomberman, and yeah, whatever. People want to focus on the big two, and because at the end of the day, it wasn't going to be TurboGrafx versus Sega because you knew Nintendo was going to be in the fight. It was going to be who was going to fight Nintendo, who was going to take on their dominance.
Yeah.
And yeah, we lost. Like we didn't have the licenses. There's all kinds of stories and theories around how the consoles were, or the games were manufactured, and like costs, and all kinds of things. So it was just, yeah, couldn't compete, fortunately.
It's common that there's that story of like the third person in many different businesses where it's like really it's the main two and there's always the third guy who like wants
Yeah,
to be the competitor but just doesn't
but
quite make it, unfortunately. Yeah, yeah.
what about me? What about me? We had
um
these.
what's your favorite TurboGrafx-16 game, and do you play any of them still?
I'm embarrassed to say I've not fired up into my turbos in a while. Like I've got the original and the Express and the Duo. I have to find the power cord, but yeah, um, for me, like it depends what you're looking for, right? Like Bomberman, you just can't beat a 5-person Bomberman competition, right? That is such a great experience. I'm going to flashback here, but we had a big event for a launch somewhere at this theater called the Park West in Chicago. It holds a couple thousand people, and it was bonk theme, and all the people handing hors d'oeuvres and drinks were dressed up like Flintstones and stuff, and and we had to go. We had a Bomberman competition, and like people had to root for the color of the player they had to win some kind of free something. I don't remember what it was, but it was like me and four of the people went up on a stage at this auditorium and played Bomberman on a TV in front of us in this big projector, and people were screaming, "Go blue! Go blue! Go blue! Go red!" And I was just kind of like, um, I had a few Heinekens, and I was just going like, "Oh!" And then I remember I was the first one to die, and I like stepped back, and I kind of joked like I was going to kick at the TV, and I'm like, "Holy shit! There's like 1,000, 2,000 people behind me. Don't kick the TV over, dumbass." And it was like this whole Bomberman party, and it was, and because it's such a great way to, especially pre-online, like you didn't have the internet, like how do you get people together to talk trash to each other and have fun and have that communal experience? Bomberman was such a great experience for that. um you know and then the TV sports line was great. It was underrated because all the players were named after the dev team. So who wants to play Joe Smith, the programmer, when you can play Joe Montana? That was a problem. Um, the shooters, I always think of like Blazing Lasers. I remember like a big sense of accomplishment because again, I'm not like a savant game player. Like I beat Blazing Lasers. Like I can talk to people about Blazing Lasers when they call. That was like a big big deal for me. Military Madness is such a cool, quirky, interesting turn-based strategy game. Like I remember like one of the CS shows, we had to set up a kiosk, and there was a guy would show up every day, and he would stand there for 8 hours. Like just like he never left. Like he loved the game so much, he would just stand there and play the game the whole show on that one kiosk. We're like, that dude's still there, man. We're like, holy shit, he's just playing the game, and it is very addictive. And then I think it turned into Steel was later in CD-ROM. There was a wonderful person named Victor Ireland that had Working Designs as a company that would port over games from Japan, and it was another turn-based strategy game. But Splatterhouse, Gates of Thunder, World Court Tennis, Andre Ponzi Kickboxing. It was like a quirky little kind of strategy fighting game. You had to like level up your character, and you would just like repeat different kicks, to get the strength up. And it had very fluid animation. It was done by a developer in France. That it was a very cool little niche game that people don't think about. Devil's Crush, all those games.
I thought about asking that question as, what's your favorite TG16 game and why is it Bonk? But I didn't know.
The earlier bonks were really fun. Like the, I'm torn because there's that phrase, jumping the shark, where like, when Bonk turned into a shooter, did we jump the shark a little bit? Because it's a platform game, and now you got a guy with these funny sunglasses and he's flying around. So it's like maybe we jumped the shark with Arizona. I don't know. Some people love it. To each his own.
It's been really fun playing through Bonk. And so many people come into chat and tell me about these other Bonk games. I didn't have Bonk Revenge as a kid, so I actually got that one this past year.
Oh,
So I actually haven't beaten that one yet either. But just even there's other remakes of it on the GameCube, on all these
yeah.
other platforms, and we've seen some people in the community have started running Super Bonk. Like it's but I hadn't seen Air Zonk until this past year either, and it's a quirky game for sure.
Yeah, yeah. It was kind of like, okay, we're going back to the well here. Got another bonk. Different, but yeah.
What's kind of some of your favorite stories or memories? Oh, but first, that story about the party, amazing. I wish I could have gone to that party with the bomber band. That sounds so fun.
Yeah, it was crazy. It was at the Park West, and if I remember right, there was a big fight about putting a Godzilla on the roof or something, and yeah, it was just there was a lot of people there, and people are screaming for your color, and you're playing with Bomberman on a stage, and it was like Brad and Bill and some other people were up there, and then friends of mine were dressed in the Bonk outfit, like walking around. You put that hat on, the head, you couldn't breathe after like 20 minutes. It was kind of hot.
All
I don't know
right,
where the hell that ever went to. Somebody's got it.
chat. The next thing is, yeah, I was about to say the next thing is we have to find out who has the bonk costumes. We
There's at
need
least
that.
two. There's at least two because they would get sweaty and people would go back off stage and be like, "Get me out of this thing." So somebody somewhere in the Chicago area probably got access to one of those. I don't have one, but yeah. Um, stories, man, there's a lot. At I remember being in a meeting once with there was a bunch of execs with and there was a buyer from some store or something like that, and they needed somebody to come up and play the game, and I was like, I'll go play Legendary Axe. So I was up there with the suits, and I'm playing Legendary Axe, and there's a salesperson, with the classic like gold Rolex, and just like, yeah, this, that, and it's an 800 number phone call, it's free, and it's like, no, it's not. You buy it. And I'm like, do I call them out in front of all these people, or do I keep playing Legendary Axe? So I was just like, I was torn, right? Because I was like, oh, I'll just shut up, get through the presentation, and then tell the person later. It's like, it's an 847 number, right? Like this is not free. But I bit my tongue, so that was tricky. At the very end, and people are going to freak about this, but there was like a fire sale because there was all this inventory, and you could buy all of the games. I swear, I think it was $3 each. So it was just like we got to clear out the inventory. We're shutting down. Hudson's buying it, and you get like a sheet and it showed all the games. And my friend Mike, the super gamer, had later quit to go work at a fruit stand because he could make more money and do that. And then he was like, "I want them all." I was like, "Okay, I'll buy them for you. You just give me the money." And I had a Toyota MR2 at the time. I filled my entire trunk with TurboGrafx games, like just literally to the top. And granted, an MR2 has a small trunk, but like just this pile of, and an MR2 is a small trunk in the back, an engine behind your head, and then like a little spare tire and stuff at the front. And I think I had games up there too because I bought games and he bought games, and I just had this rolling go kart of a car filled with video games for like I don't know $500 or whatever the hell it came out to, or $900 at the time. And I just remember like this is funny. Like my whole car is full of TurboGrafx games. I've never seen this many games at once. Um,
Mondello says
we were at
dream.
CES once,
Mon-
and go ahead. Sorry.
Mondello says dream car. And then a few people in chat were saying $3 for like Chase HQ or Toma. I mean, I have a Chase HQ still, and it's kind of damaged. It barely works, and I checked it up. I was like, oh, maybe I'll buy another one. Like maybe I'll get one, and it was like $300, and I was like, or not.
Or not. I had no idea.
Yeah.
They were going. Yeah, and these were all like shrunk wrap, straight up, brand new games. And one time we were at CES, and at the night, you leave, and we had all these games set up, and they were prototype games. Right? Like they were games. This was probably TTI times because they were on CD-ROM, and we left for the night, and everyone's like, "Hey, is everything good here?" It's in Chicago. We're like, "Yeah, yeah, yeah. We have a security guard." Security guard's like, "Okay," and then at night the cleaning staff comes around. We showed up the next morning, probably hungover. I don't know. We were out that night, and we found the security guard, and we had this special space for Gates of Thunder or Lords of Thunder, one of the two. But it had like a cool chair and it had like a biggerish TV and everything. And we show up, and the security guard was sleeping in that chair, and we're like, "Uh oh!" And then I'm going around like checking the different machines. Stolen. Like people had like stole all of these like prototype, not well, prototypes is a dumb word, like pre-final, pre-gold master builds of games because security guard fell asleep. And then we're just like scrambling, like we have all these kiosks. We're like, where do we just find games so that they're not a black screen? And and then we woke security guard up, and that was an interesting discussion. And we're like, holy shit, we got robbed overnight, and all these games are gone. And I'm like, it was one of those things in the back of my mind. I was like, shit, fucking lock those things down that night. I was like, we should have spent that time and rounded everything up and put it somewhere safe. And it was like, no, we got security. And I was like, spider sense is tingling, man. It's a bad idea.
Oh, I hate the feeling of like I should have listened to myself. I knew that I should have listened to
Yeah,
myself.
totally. Yeah, that was just totally like, oh no. And then when they shut down, Hudson Soft started TTI. So I was offered a job to go to Culver City to work for TTI. I remember going to the library and again getting the newspaper because that's what people did back in the 90s, and being like, wow, it's very expensive to live in Long Beach or whatever. And I almost moved out there, but I flew out there. I had a meeting with the TTI folks, and I didn't have a good feeling that it was going to turn things around. So I didn't. And they're like, okay, work out of your apartment then, and we'll give you manuals to work on and games to debug. And I was like, okay, I'll call my buddy Mike. So like all of these TTI games were like debugged by me, my buddy Mike, and this other friend of mine, Chris, because they're the really good gamers. And I had like a little box in my apartment thing because no one would upload because it was pre-internet-ish. So a FedEx would show up with an EEPROM or a CD-ROM drive, and I'd get up in the morning, I open this little box in my apartment, I'm like, oh yeah, we got a game to test. And I call Mike, call Chris, like, hey, we got a game. And then they would find the bugs. I would type them up, and then I would print them out and then fax them out to Culver City and be like, we found these bugs. And like maybe while one of the guys was working on the bugs, I would be working on the manual and especially when they were translated from Japanese, I was trying to help with localization stuff. And I did that for a couple of years. And then at that time, ICOM Simulations was developing games for the TurboGrafx. Not all of them were the greatest, but Camp California, Yobro, Arthur, um, Beyond Shadowgate. There were some decent ones. It was a mix. I ended up starting to do quality assurance and testing for ICOM Simulations. So
Nice.
when TTI kind of went under, I ended up moving over to ICOM Simulations. That was later bought by Viacom, and then became Viacom New Media. And then I worked on Beavis and Butthead games, but that's another story. Yeah, that was kind of transition.
That's great. Those stories are amazing. Thank you so much for sharing those with us. That was great. So kind of let's fast forward. So and chat and everyone else, just so you know, we're gonna do Q&As at the end. So this is my last, or this is basically my last question. So if anyone has questions in the chat, please or start thinking about your questions. We'll come back to you in just 1 second. So
Yes.
fast forward 30 years, 30-ish years, and tell us about the projects you're working on now.
Um, yeah, I've got a couple of different things going on. About 2+ years ago, I launched a podcast called Game Dev Advice, and I would work with people, and they always be like, "You have these stories," and I'm like, "Well, yeah, I've been around, seen stuff, and have friends." So I just kind of started these as the equivalent of what's the Steinfeld show? Seinfeld show with comedians and cards getting coffee, right? Like just mostly friends of mine or friends of friends where I ask them about how they got in the industry, like what advice do they have for now getting in the industry, like what advice to progress in the industry, what are you concerned about, tell me a funny story. And this little podcast, I'm not real militant about it. It comes out every 3 or 4 weeks. um, it's been growing, like I'm part of this network of something that now has ads starting. It's starting to kind of grow a bit, and it's just kind of fun. I do the whole thing myself. I record it myself. I edit it myself in GarageBand, and I write the show notes myself because I'm a little OCD about stuff. And I'm like, well, editing is kind of like content, so like I don't want to outsource what ends up in the editing room floor and what stays in. So yeah, it's a project. I've been thinking about, like a coaching or mentoring type program for people who want to get in the game industry. So I've been kicking that around for about 5 years, kind of just thinking about it. And because I'm always hearing like, oh, you work in video games, you should talk. And it's like, yeah, but it's not all unicorns and rainbows and sunshine. There's stuff you got to do. So yeah, maybe potentially um, mentoring and building like a mastermind or something around that. But the big thing is Level X, and this is a company. I was at Zynga until 4 years ago. I left there to join this company that makes video games for doctors, right? Which you're like, what? But the whole idea is making these games for doctors, understanding where their challenges are, working with medical professionals, helping them get better at their profession, and then building this business around there. And it's snowballed from, I don't know, it was a dozen of us in a WeWorks about 4 years ago to like 125, 130
Wow.
people. We were acquired by this awesome company in Mulheim, Germany called Brain Lab in June. And it's it's cool to work on, because I worked in all kinds of video games, but to work on video games that help doctors, that doctors then help patients, and then you're indirectly helping people's lives, and it's not just purely entertainment, right? Like, oh, there's this Magic Leap viewer that BrainLab developed that we helped with the fidelity that was used by neurosurgeons to visualize separating these conjoined twins that were at UC Davis. And they spent like 7 months playing this 24-hour surgery to basically separate them because you're joined at the head. And our technology helped these twins get separated. So you're like, shit, that gaming stuff just affected these two people's lives and family and radius around that forever, right? So that is what pulled me to Level X, and inspiring, right? At this point in my career, like I've done, how do you do something else? So
That's amazing. That's really neat. I did look into your company. I looked into that company when I was reaching out to you, and I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. We had someone in chat said, should be video games for all professions, LOL. And then we also have, I thanks, Red, for posting the game dev advice podcast link in there. I saw a bunch of people saying that they went and checked it out and are definitely going to subscribe. So thanks for that. And for those watching this later, I'll provide a link in the show notes or however we do this, so that people can go and listen to that podcast.
cool.
And then I'm going to open it up for questions. I know, and also a shout out to Dog Developer who's in chat. Dog Developer is going to school for game development. So we've got we've got people from all over, TG16 fans and people from the game dev side. So that's really cool. And
That's cool.
Stro, I knew you were going to ask this question. I actually prompted John beforehand. So Stropex Gaming says, what was your reaction and thoughts when Zaw called you about the TG16?
Wait, when who called me? Zonk?
When Princess Zaw, when I called you about
Oh,
this.
yeah. I was like, huh, okay. I was
Did you immediately recognize Princess Zaw? Like, did you know I was from Bonk or no?
no, I was not familiar, and I was just like, sure, I'll talk Turbo Days. Like that was a part of my life, and people want to know about it. I'd be totally up for it. So I had no idea. To be honest, the only thing I've been on Twitch before was like Moby did a presentation about ambient music, and I was like, I checked that out, but I'm not familiar with Twitch. I watched your Twitch the other night when you're playing Mario 35, and yeah, I'm, why not share that information for what's happened and what's going on? So yeah, I was just like, I've always been kind of like, that sounds cool. I'll do it. So yeah, thank you for reaching out. That was
Thank you.
cool.
Thank you so much for coming on here. We've got a question from Custard. Custard says, hi, John. Did you have TGs loaded with games ready to go in case you had to find a better way to describe how to beat a part, or were your binders the only resources you need?
It's pretty much binders. So like, you had a game in and you were playing whatever the game was, and then it'd be like, how do you get by Newtopia? And you'd be like, hold on. Mike, how the fuck do you get by that boss? No. But literally just like scrambling that, and you'd be like, okay, are you on this? And just kind of reading that binder, because again, there was no computers, there was no database, there's no way to type it in. It was very analog, for lack of a better word. It was atoms, not bits. You had to just kind of do it that way. And the irony is, there's a friend of mine named Hans who I worked with at Midway, was in the parallel job at Nintendo at the same time as I was. And I got to know Hans, and I'm like, wait a minute, you work for Nintendo? He's like, yeah, I was in the hotline phone. So I'm like, wait a minute, what? I was like, you son of a bitch, you're doing the same thing I was at Nintendo, and he was on the hotline phone. It was a little more professional, a little bit more upscale Nintendo, but he did the same thing that I did at TurboGrafx, and then we both worked on Mortal Kombat together. So it was kind of this different times because I'd left and he'd filled in or moved in and did a great job. So it was, yeah, it was just kind of wild that there's like I met somebody else outside of NEC that did the same job I did, which that was the only time ever in my entire life I met anyone.
That's awesome. Um, the follow up to or part of that is like, did you ever have to come back and say, "I'll get back to you on that" with a certain question? Like you didn't know any of the answers.
Yeah, you have to stall a little bit. Sometimes I think there were times like, yeah, we would call people back. We would just like, give me your number and I'll call you back, which, again, like you think about like, give me your personal number to this rando at a hotline number, we'll call you back. But people were very just like, yeah. And you would call people back to give tips if you were really stumped and Mike wasn't around or nobody was around and you didn't know what to do. That yeah, you would call people back sometimes if you didn't know. And I think at one time they tried moving it to a 900 number. I don't know if that ever happened. One of the craziest rumors, because my friend Mark, that I worked with, he went to Culver City to work for TTI. I need to track him down. I saw him at a party once. The rumor is that Tony Hawk was a hotline phone rep for the TTI out in LA. And I can't guarantee that for sure, but I've heard people tell that story, and it was like, well, he's about the same age as me, and he was a gamer, and it was in Culver City, and people, legend has it, like maybe I need to track him down on the Twitter to see if he actually did that, but yeah, that's just a random story about Tony Hawk and
That's
the TTI
crazy.
hotline because they moved it all out there, and it was in a high rise in Culver City, and they had a hotline phone. My friend Mark helped establish it out there, and the rumor was Tony Hawk may or may not have been a hotline phone rep if you called in on the TurboGrafx TTI Hudson Soft thing.
That's awesome. What's the we've got Phantom Limb Gamer says, "What's the very first game system you owned?"
Yeah, that I owned was in television, and that was in the early '80s, and it was. I still remember this, $265 freaking dollars in the early '80s was like $1 million back then. And I remember like mowing yards and selling my ice skates and talking my brother into paying for half of it because $265 was a lot of money when you're in seventh grade or eighth grade, whatever I was back then. And that was my love for gaming was the television and that in the arcades. But yeah, the television, right? So that I have one somewhere and the power supply always burns out. But yeah.
That's awesome. I've got a question from Highlander723. He says, "Hi, John. If you have somebody in college right now in computer science trying to get into this industry, what advice would you give them? And also, do you have any TG16 merch?"
Uh, TG6. Well, two questions there. TG16 merch. I a very passionate, um, motivated collector tracked me down about a decade ago and pretty much wiped me out. Like I had boxes and boxes of satin jackets and press releases and uh, plexiglass turbo. Like part of me is like, I shouldn't have done that, But at the time, the money was good and it fit. And I randomly, because I've been in this house for 20 plus years, like I stumbled on a TurboGrafx neon duffel gym bag when I was up in the attic a couple months ago, and I put it up on eBay just for the hell of it, and sold it for a lot more than I thought it would. And I was like, shit, I shouldn't have got rid of all that stuff
Yeah,
because I had no idea that this was going to happen. But I'm pretty light on the merch. I used to have a lot of it, and yeah, like photos from the whole TTI press launch and all the executives and all these jackets and t-shirts and mugs, everything. Um, yeah, that that ship has sailed. If you're
that's
looking into gaming, the fact that you're studying computer science, I think is fantastic. Um, Especially for an engineer to be to get that baseline of a CS degree and understand the 3D math and understand the calculus and all that kind of that deep stuff that you need to understand to be really good at writing clean, mostly not buggy code, is important. Like a lot of times in my roles as a director of talent acquisition, we get candidates and I'll be like, hey, I'm a Unity developer and they have a little bit of a sketch background and we have an aptitude test, just like a lot of companies do. And you send that test, they have a hard time with it, because they don't have that foundation. So the fact that you're studying, computer science, that's great, and that'll give you a leg up once you finish that degree, so that when you eventually take a computer science, or excuse me, a test for engineering test, you'll have that those chops and that background to understand how to answer those questions and do well. So yeah. Um, Follow me on Twitter, and maybe someday I'll get this mastermind group thing going here. But yeah,
Um, Great. And I would say also, let's put that link back into chat for the podcast because I'm sure there's great advice on there as well.
yeah. Every show is like, how'd you get in the industry? I interview engineers that are like CTOs, all the gamut, CEOs, creative directors, you name it. I've had 37 guests on since January of 2019 when I launched the show.
Question: was it true that NEC passed on Mortal Kombat exclusive offer from Midway? ASMR Destiny wants to know.
Man, I
You
should
must
know
get
that.
that question a lot because your reaction was like,
No, I know. Like I don't know, and I should know. Like I worked on Mortal Kombat, Deadly Alliance, Deception, and Armageddon. Um, I don't know the exact answer. Like, the big deal was always around Street Fighter, and like the Street Fighter, and do we get the Street Fighter for that's going to be our killer for the systems and stuff. But I remember I I remember looking for like because it might have happened, because I remember looking for like a Mortal Kombat killer, which there are none because Mortal Kombat's one of a kind. And a couple times I was sent to an arcade to do research on games to look to port to the TurboGrafx, and playing some like bad knockoffs of Mortal Kombat. They were just bloody for bloody's sake, and they had terrible frame rate and control and all that kind of stuff. Friends of mine, Incredible Technologies, worked on one of them. So yeah, I don't know if NEC had missed out, and we were trying to figure out how to fill that slot. But I'm still friends with some of the founders on the Mortal Kombat side. I need to ask that story. I'm embarrassed. I don't know why. After working on Mortal Kombat for 8 years, I should know that, but I don't.
um,
Sorry.
we have another question around just the general attitude when people called into the hotline. Were people happy, angry, upset? And then that, thanks, Parksonian, for that question.
Yes. Yeah. It was a gamut. Like, yeah, it was weird because like some people would be like really pissed off, like I don't know why I can't get by this, and you're like, all right, step back, step back. What level are you on? Where you at? What's going on? You had to kind of like talk them through like an air traffic controller or something. And other times people were friendly about it, but I don't remember a unified consensus of feedback. It seemed to vary. Um, Maybe the later shifts at 11 o'clock got people that were more angry because they'd had some drinks, or I don't know. Like, but I don't remember like general tone. Like every time I picked the phone up was pure dread. But yeah, there were plenty of people that were like pissed off and wanted answers, but not consistently.
That's
I
good.
think people were, pretty good.
Um, JV says, could you tell which games were good and which were bad based on the kinds of questions you got and how many?
After they were released, you mean, and stuff like yeah.
I think, yeah, yeah.
Kind of, yeah. The good games that were really challenging, you get a lot of phone calls for, and the games that nobody kind of cared about, you didn't hear about. Maybe you'd hear a little bit in their tone how they were asking the questions and stuff. We knew it, like we'd play games, and sometimes like the market team would come down and give us a game when the phone calls weren't ringing, and we'd be like, crap, man. Oh yeah, yeah, but it's on the SKU, it's on the like, no, this game's crap. Like why? What? Why are we going to release this? So we were like an impromptu focus test. Not that it was always adhered to, but like we kind of had ideas around that too, because a lot of the players were the core demographics, 17 to 19-year olds and stuff like that. So but yeah, I don't know
Retro
if that
Man
answers it.
makes a really good point. Nowadays, it's like a luxury if you get to talk to a real live rep on the phone for anything. So it's not. It's now granted, we've got the internet, so you can play through you can find
Right.
videos of anything. But I think that's an interesting point. We used to be able to call someone on the phone and say, "Hey, how do I beat this?" And now you have to do all this other types of research.
Yep. You'd be like, all right, uh, how you doing today? Just yeah, the phone would ring, you just pick it up, and I never counted like many phone calls I took in one day or anything like that. I should have, but yeah, it was interesting, and just hearing stories from other people talking about phone calls and stuff.
Mondello has a question, and Mondello, we might need you to clarify. You said any advice for rolling with the bad times when working in an industry?
The bad times, like when your company's not going to win and stuff like that, or um,
Yeah, we'll see if Mondello comes back, and we'll come back exactly like that. Said Mondello.
yeah,
Company isn't doing well.
I think you just have to take pride in your work, and knowing like, all right, if this doesn't work out, at least I didn't contribute to the downfall, right? So just kind of keeping your chin up and just being like, I'll do my thing. Fate's going to be where it's going to be. And there's all these things outside of my sphere of influence that I cannot control, but I can control this stuff that I can do. So I'm going to make sure to get these copies in the binder and get get the binder built up for answering questions, and do my thing. And if I can, I can. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, perspective changes everything. That thing comes with age. Is you're like, what feels like you're the end of the world, holy shit, right now, a year from now or 5 years from now, you're like, yeah, that wasn't bad. So you just have to kind of put perspective, and a year from now, 5 years from now, it's just going to affect me. Maybe not. Most likely not.
And I know that no one asked, but I know that we have some Mortal Kombat fans in chat. So could you talk a little bit about your work on Mortal Kombat?
Yeah, it was. I came to Midway at 2000, and we were transitioning from MK4 arcade, which is kind of the valley of MK land, and we were going to switch over 100% console, like no arcades. So I was the first producer at Midway, um, which was different because they didn't normally have producers at all, at least in Chicago. And I was trying to help with scheduling and project management and things like that. And the MK team was finishing up the grid, which was, if everyone should go watch Insert Coin. My friend Josh Sway did a documentary about Midway. Um, and the grid finished up, and we were working on MK Deadly Alliance. And that was kind of like, all right, we're gonna turn this thing around. What's the story? And I remember going out with Ed Boon, the co-creator, to Microsoft when they were launching this new console, this giant console, these giant controllers called the Xbox. And they were very good about developer support, and the architecture was very good for the engineers. It wasn't obtuse and quirky and bizarre like the PS2 was. And then we had to get the game going on three platforms, three very different platforms. Like the GameCube is very anemic compared to like an Xbox, and a PS2 has challenges, but it's still very powerful. So we used renderware, which was back when engines were first taking off. This is pre-Unity, and it was a tough slog. Like it was a 2-year grind to get this game out and to launch it on the console, and not do the arcade. And some people left Midway to start Studio Gigante to compete with a game called Tao Fang. So it was going to be, MK versus the people left midway to work on Tao Fang, and it was tough, and it was very rewarding to be part of that, and basically to put MK back on the map. It was kind of like, you know, we did it. It was, I don't know, 5 million units we sold, and we sold like a million in Europe on the PS2 alone, or something crazy. And I remember being in the conference room, uh, and there was like a big celebration, like fucking did it, man. Like we got, MK's back, and then we had champagne, and it was just like, because it was tough. I mean, the game industry back then too was very crunchy, and people were passionate, and it was always like a hard deadline, and you know, you weren't working normal hours. You had to do the thing to hit the date to get out before Grand Theft Auto. It seemed like every game I worked on, 3 MKs are like, I'm gonna beat GTA out, because GTA would just come out and just suck all the life out of the gaming world, because it was such a thing. And I remember with Deception coming out in '04, we were the number one game in the country for two weeks, and I printed the MPD data and I had it on my door outside of my office. Like, fuck yeah, man, we won. We were the number one game for 2 weeks. Deal, because it was interesting times. Yeah.
That's awesome. The Combat King, one of the Mortal Kombat fans in chat, said, "Are you hidden in the crypt in any of those games? Unlockable photos or anything?"
Um, no, but there's some interviews that I'd done online talking about the crypt and stuff. I did the voice for Rain, and by voice I mean the folly, the grunts and the all that kind of stuff. So if he plays Rain, I think on Deception, every time we punch them, that's my voice. Uh, but um, the crypt was interesting too, because we had to fill it full of cool stuff, and like for the PAL version for Europe, you couldn't in Germany acknowledge that MK1 and 2 existed because it was illegal. MK was not allowed in Germany for MK1 and 2. So we had to do like a special PAL version and remove any kind of MK1 reference in the crypt for Germany, because in that world it just was not a thing. So it was just like, we gotta do what for Germany? It's like, but yeah, the crypt was just full of like little stuff. If people look, there's a video on YouTube that's a snapshot of like a day in the life, and I've got a few shots in there, very briefly, of kind of like a day in the life of making MK, and shows Ed pulling up and like walking around the studio and doing a mocap session and all that kind of stuff. So
Um,
and I've got some of the background here. You can see the Deadly Alliance. I had those framed after we came out and did so well. I was excited about it and proud of it. So yeah.
it looks like we have quite a few Deadly Alliance fans in chat. So you've talked up Mike a lot about the hotline.
Mhm.
So do we know where Mike is now? People are very excited about Mike.
Um, he was testing games for a casino company, and uh, he was one of those people that just loved to find bugs. That was like his passion. Like a lot of people, myself included, we use QA as kind of a launching pad and go into design or production, as I did, to be a producer, and then art and stuff. And Mike just loved finding bugs, because it was like, when we worked together, because I recruited Mike to Viacom New Media, which was Viacom Simulations, and then it was when Viacom bought us, we made Beavis and Butthead, Guts, all these Nickelodeon games and stuff, and we would have Mike there, and then I got his brother to join, so that I'd be like, engineers would be like, yeah, my code's good, there's no bugs, we can send it to Sega, and I'm like, I'm not gonna out him here, but I'm gonna put the Blank Brothers on the game, and they'd be like, oh shit, what? And I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna put them, because I was managing the QA department at the time, and whenever people thought their code was bug free, I throw these brothers on it, and they would just crush these engineers' dreams because they'd find the bugs. Now, sometimes it was like, we call them an 8-arm tester bug because it was like, well, nobody's going to do this and this and this and this and this and this and this combo. So they're like, all right, we're going to not worry about that one. Let's focus on the ones. But that's just been his thing, and he's just so good at that. I haven't talked to him in probably 10 years. I think he was at my birthday party I had at the bowling alley with some friends a while ago, and yeah, I need to reach out to him because with COVID and everything like that. But yeah,
That's awesome. We
he's
have
got all the games. I bought all those games for Mike. That filled up my MR2. He's got them.
we have Park said Mike strikes fear into the hearts of coders everywhere.
Terrify them because programmers tend to be a little bit of an arrogant type, And you're like, oh yeah, your code's great. I'm going to put the brothers on it. I'm going to put Mike on it. What do you think about shit? Especially some of them were from German or Germany or UK, and they'd be started like swearing and like put them on it. But whenever he and his brother give the thumbs up, we would submit it, and the games would get through in one pass. Because whenever you have a game on a console, you have to send it off, and they have to test it and review or reject it and stuff. And I remember at Viacom, we actually got a letter from Sega, the company that killed the Turbo. When I was working on that like, we had like the best record of submitting games because of the rejection rate was so low because our QA department was so good. Now it created conflict because there was a deadline, and I'd be like, no, Q's got to finish this. And sometimes you push that deadline. That was always sometimes a heated discussion, but yeah, it was cool to be recognized by Sega for having such great bug free. And it might have been at Sega CD at that point. Who knows? There's so many Sega 32X, all those systems. But yeah.
All right. Well, I'm going to close out the night with one last question. Let's see. Any chance so Angry Old Man Gaming wants to know what your greatest TurboGrafx-16 accomplishment was.
I've been beating Blazing Lasers. I just remember being like very excited that I did that, and it was kind of earlier in my career, and it was a real challenge, right? Like I was going back and forth and just trying to beat it. So probably doesn't sound too climactic, but yeah, I think it was just beating it and be able to be like, yeah, I finally beat that game. It was a tough shooter, and that was the thing about the Turbo. There were so many great shooters. It was just there wasn't that audience in the North American market as it was in Japan for shooters, and we had so many great shooters. So.
Okay, I have to read this one out aloud too. I don't know exactly how to say your name. Set Toe Stun. One, hey John, it's Chris, your old TG16 coworker. Just wanted to say, great interview. Miss those old Turbo days. Oh my goodness, thanks for coming to hang out, Chris.
He's over. Chris, how you doing? He's in another continent. I know who. Yeah, when you said the name, Chris. Good to see you. Good to, whatever this is. Yes. Holy shit. Yeah, I posted online that I was going to do this. And I don't even know what time zone it is there. He's in another place in the world. But that is. And Chris was one of the people that when I had to write the manuals and do the QA, it was Mike and Chris, and Chris would show up at that apartment in Barrington, we'd hammer out, find the bugs, and wow, that's very cool. Good to see you. Good to see you, Chris.
Oh, that's so awesome. Chat loved that. Chat loved the reunion.
Right here, a TurboGrafx reunion across the world in 2 different continents. Happy night.
Thank you. I don't think I could thank you enough for coming on and just letting us take this time. I know we ran a little bit late and long, but I just really, really appreciate you coming to share these stories. It's like kind of how I alluded to around the documentaries. We don't get to hear too much about the TurboGrafx-16 in the documentaries and other things. So it's just really awesome that, we got to hear your story and just share that out with other TurboGrafx-16 fans. So thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, I'm glad to do it. And no, it's cool to share these stories. Some of us have passed since the Turbo days. I was sorry, I'm losing it here. I was looking at the list, and there was a couple guys. I was like, I was looking at the list for the different call times, and I was like, shit, these two guys have passed on. Shit, it time moves on. So I'm glad to share these stories and connect with people, and you know, still talk about that system. Right, it was a cool system. We should have done better, and excited to have been part of it, and share these stories. So thank you.
And it's super exciting. It's getting a little bit of a comeback. I mean, it feels like it to me. Granted, I talk about it every day, but with the TurboGrafx-16 Mini coming out, there seems to be a renewed interest in the TG16, and people in my community have gone out and bought the TG16 Mini and are experiencing the TurboGrafx games for the first time ever, like 30
Yeah.
years later. So I mean, it's amazing. It really is amazing. And thank you so much.